LeBron just said what the entire NBA was thinking, and it changes everything for Victor Wembanyama. Nobody expected LeBron James to say it this directly. Not after another exhausting NBA season. Not with trade rumors exploding across the league. Not while every franchise is already scrambling to prepare for next year. But when LeBron looked into the camera and started talking about Victor Wembanyama, the basketball world suddenly stopped debating potential and started talking about destiny. This wasn't casual praise. This wasn't another veteran showing respect to a rising star. It sounded like a warning, a message to every front office, every superstar, and every contender chasing another championship. Because according to one of the greatest players to ever touch a basketball, Victor Wembanyama is becoming something the NBA has never truly seen before. And that's exactly why the San Antonio Spurs suddenly find themselves under more pressure than ever. The excitement surrounding Wembanyama has reached another level. Fans already knew he could score from anywhere on the floor. They knew he could erase shots at the rim without breaking a sweat. They knew his combination of size, mobility, and basketball IQ looked almost unfair. But now, after hearing LeBron's thoughts, one question has taken over every NBA discussion. Are the Spurs moving fast enough to build a championship team around him? Because talent alone doesn't win title. NBA history is filled with legendary players who waited too long for their organizations to surround them with the right pieces. Some eventually won, others never did. The difference often came down to one decision, one trade, one offseason, one missed opportunity. San Antonio knows that clock has already started ticking. Every game Wembanyama plays raises expectations even higher. Every dominant performance makes the rest of the roster look like it needs another major upgrade. Every playoff lesson makes fans wonder whether this young core is enough or whether the Spurs must make one blockbuster move before the rest of the Western Conference catches up. That's where things become incredibly complicated. Should San Antonio stay patient and trust its young stars? Or should it cash in valuable assets for proven veterans who can help Wembanyama compete for championships immediately? That debate is growing louder by the day. And if what insiders are beginning to suggest is even partially true, the next few months could completely reshape not only the future of the Spurs, but the balance of power across the entire NBA. Because once LeBron publicly recognizes someone as the future of basketball, people inside the league pay attention. The biggest question now isn't whether Victor Wembanyama can become the face of the NBA. The real question is whether San Antonio can build a championship team before everyone else realizes just how unstoppable he is. Before we uncover the moves that could completely transform the Spurs, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you're excited to follow every major NBA story, trade rumor, and behind-the-scenes development, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an update. And if you believe the Spurs should make a blockbuster move this offseason, comment 1. If you think they should stay patient and trust their young core, comment 2. Why? Wembanyama is not just tall, he is terrifying. The easiest mistake in basketball is looking at Victor Wembanyama and thinking the story begins with height. That is what casual fans see first. 7'4", impossible wingspan. Shots erased before they even reach the rim. Guards driving into the paint, looking up, and realizing too late that the angle they thought was open never existed. But LeBron James saw something deeper. He did not talk about Wembanyama like a science experiment. He talked about him like a basketball problem with no clean answer. The handle, the timing, the footwork, the way he can catch the ball awkwardly, turn before the defender reacts, and still find a clean shot. That is not size. That is skill. And skill is what makes this dangerous. Because size alone can be planned for. Teams can crowd the paint, they can send doubles, they can put strength on him, they can force him into uncomfortable spots. But when a player that tall can also dribble, pass, shoot, read the floor, and defend like a one-man system, suddenly the old rules stop working. That is why LeBron's words mattered so much. He was not simply praising a young star, he was warning the league that Wembanyama is not following the normal superstar timeline. He is ahead of schedule, and somehow still nowhere near finished. That combination should scare every team trying to win in the next decade. Steve Nash saw it too. He described Wemby almost like a basketball teenager. Not because he is immature, but because his game is still growing into itself. That is the frightening part. The league is already struggling with the unfinished version. So what happens when the complete version arrives? San Antonio understands the answer better than anyone. They have seen this kind of franchise-changing big man before. David Robinson, Tim Duncan. Now Wembanyama, different players, different eras, same organizational pattern. Quiet superstar, serious culture, championship expectations. But this version may be the most unpredictable of all, because Wemby does not just protect the rim. He changes the emotional temperature of a game. Players hesitate, coaches adjust rotations, entire offenses bend away from him, and on the other end, defenders cannot decide whether to guard him like a center, a wing, or a guard. That is not normal. That is why the Spurs cannot treat this like an ordinary rebuild anymore. The finals loss that exposed everything. The Spurs did not lose the finals because Victor Wembanyama was not ready. They lost because the team around him was not fully ready for the weight of that stage. That is the painful truth San Antonio has to face. Reaching the finals so early was incredible. It proved the rebuild had worked faster than anyone expected. It showed that Wembanyama was already capable of carrying a franchise into the deepest waters of the postseason. But the Knicks showed them the difference between arriving and finishing. New York had experience. They had toughness. They had players who understood how to slow the game down when everything became chaotic. They knew how to punish mistakes, how to steal possessions, and how to survive when the fourth quarter became a test of patience. San Antonio had moments. New York had answers. That is why the series hurt so much. It was not a sweep where the Spurs looked completely overmatched. It was worse than that. They had chances, they had winnable games, they had stretches where Wembanyama looked like the best player on the floor, and still, when the final minutes arrived, the Spurs could not close the door. By the end, Wemby looked exhausted. He was carrying too much offense, too much defense, too much responsibility, and too much emotional weight for one young player. Every possession seemed to run through him. Every defensive breakdown needed him to clean it up. Every late game shot felt like it had to come from him or because of him. That is not sustainable. Even the greatest players need help. LeBron knows that better than anyone. His early Cleveland years were defined by the same question San Antonio now faces. How long can a generational player carry a team before the organization must make the right move? The Spurs are not broken, but the finals revealed the cracks. They need more reliable depth. They need another late game creator. They need a backup big who can protect the rim when Wemby rests. They need shooting that punishes double teams. And most importantly, they need to avoid thinking that simply being young means they are guaranteed to return. NBA history does not work that. Windows open fast. And sometimes they close even faster. Why? San Antonio cannot panic. Here is where the Spurs must be careful. The finals loss created urgency, but urgency is not the same thing as panic. And if San Antonio makes the wrong emotional move, they could damage the very foundation that made this future so special. That is the trap. Every time a young team loses on the big stage, the outside noise gets loud. Trade this player, move that contract, add a superstar, fire up the trade machine, chase the biggest name available, do something dramatic so the fan base feels like the franchise is serious, but serious teams do not chase headlines. They solve problems. And San Antonio's problems are clear enough that they do not require desperation. They need targeted upgrades, not a full identity change. They need pieces who fit Wembanyama, not stars who force Wembanyama to adjust around them. That difference matters. The Spurs already have the most important piece in basketball. They have the centerpiece. They have the player every franchise dreams about. Now, the job is not to find another face of the team. The job is to build the right ecosystem around it. That means shooting, defense, secondary creation, veteran calm, reliable size, players who know their roles and do not need constant touches to stay engaged. It also means protecting the young core. Stephon Castle and Dylan Harper matter because they give San Antonio something most contenders do not have: elite young talent on the same timeline as Wembanyama. That is rare. That is powerful. That is the kind of advantage teams throw away when they become addicted to shortcut. LeBron praised the Spurs because they have a culture that usually understands patience. They do not overreact to noise. They do not build like a desperate franchise. They keep the main thing, but now comes the real test. Patience worked during the rebuild. Patience helped them avoid reckless trades. Patience gave Wembanyama room to grow. But after reaching the finals, patience must evolve into precision. San Antonio cannot sit still forever. They simply have to move carefully, because one perfect trade could turn them into champions. But one reckless trade could turn a decade-long window into a 2-year gamble. The De'Aaron Fox question. Every championship team eventually faces one uncomfortable question. Who fits the future, and who only looks like they do? For San Antonio, that question may now involve De'Aaron Fox. Fox is not a bad player. That is not the conversation. He is explosive, fast, dangerous with the ball, and capable of taking over games when his rhythm is right. On his best nights, he gives the Spurs something every contender needs: a guard who can collapse the defense and create offense when the system breaks down. But the finals changed the tone, because in the biggest moments, San Antonio needed steadiness. They needed clean decisions. They needed a guard who could punish New York when the Knicks loaded up on Wembanyama. Instead, the results were uneven. There were flashes, but also mistakes. There were bursts of scoring, but also possessions where the offense lost control. And when a player has a massive contract attached to him, uneven becomes expensive. That is why Fox's future becomes complicated. The Spurs have Castle, they have Harper, they have young guards who are growing, improving, and still financially flexible. If those two become the long-term backcourt, Fox's role becomes less certain, not because he lacks talent, but because roster building is about fit, timing, and money. Championship teams cannot pay everyone. They have to choose. If San Antonio keeps Fox, they are betting that his speed, scoring, and experience will become essential beside Wemby. They are betting that the final struggles were a lesson, not a warning. They are betting that continuity matters more than flexibility. But if they trade him, they could reshape the roster around Wemby with cleaner pieces. A shooter like Tyler Herro would give spacing. A wing like Trey Murphy would bring length, defense, and three-point gravity. A bigger forward could reduce Wemby's burden. A more balanced package could help the Spurs become less dependent on one expensive guard. That is the front office puzzle. Fox has value, but his value may be highest right now before his contract becomes heavier and before Castle and Harper demand bigger roles. San Antonio does not have to rush, but they do have to be on, because sometimes the hardest move is not trading a bad player. It is trading a good one before the fit becomes a problem. The names that could change everything. If the Spurs decide to make a move, the target cannot simply be famous. The target has to make Wembanyama better. That is where the trade market becomes fascinating. San Antonio does not need a player who takes over the franchise. They need someone who completes the shape of the roster. Someone who makes the floor wider, the defense stronger, and the fourth quarter less exhausting for Wemby. Tyler Herro is one version of that answer. He brings shooting, confidence, and the ability to score without needing to be the main attraction. In San Antonio, his job would be simple. Punish defenses for collapsing on Wembanyama. If teams send two bodies at Wemby, Herro makes them pay. If the offense stalls, he can create a shot. That kind of spacing could change everything. Trey Murphy might be an even cleaner fit. Long, athletic, switchable, and dangerous from three. Murphy is the type of modern wing every contender wants. He does not need the ball to matter. He can defend multiple positions, run the floor, space the corners, and make the game easier without interrupting the hierarchy. That is exactly what Wemby needs. Then there is Lauri Markkanen. Markkanen would give the Spurs a 7-foot shooter who bends defenses in a completely different direction. Imagine opposing bigs being pulled away from the rim while Wembanyama operates inside. Imagine defenders having to choose between helping on Wemby or leaving Markkanen open. That is the kind of geometry that breaks playoff defenses. Anthony Davis is the dream with risk attached. On paper, Davis next to Wembanyama would create one of the most terrifying defensive front courts in NBA history. The paint would become a nightmare. The length, timing, and shot blocking would overwhelm teams before they even reach the rim. But Davis also comes with age, cost, and questions about how much future San Antonio should sacrifice for a win-now move. That is the balance. The Spurs are not shopping for excitement. They are shopping for fit. The wrong star could crowd Wemby's space. The right role player could unlock a dynasty. And that is why Brian Wright's next move matters so much. Because this is not about winning the trade headlock. It is about winning June. The wild trade rumors that sound impossible until they don't. Every great NBA story eventually reaches the rumor stage where imagination starts running faster than reality. That is where names like Luka Doncic, Kawhi Leonard, and even LeBron James enter the conversation. On paper, some of it sounds outrageous. Luka with Wembanyama would be basketball chaos in the best possible way. Luka's passing, patience, and half-court control paired with Wemby's size and finishing would create impossible choices for defenses. Do you step up on Luka and give Wemby the lob? Or do you stay home on Wemby and let Luka walk into his favorite shot? There is no safe answer, but the cost would be massive. San Antonio would likely have to sacrifice young guards, draft capital, and flexibility. And that is where the dream becomes dangerous. Luka is brilliant, but the Spurs have spent years building a timeline that could last a decade. Trading too much for one superstar could shorten that window. Kawhi Leonard is different. That story would be emotional. The former Spur returning to San Antonio to help the new era win a title would feel like a movie. Kawhi still brings playoff scoring, defense, strength, and championship experience. Beside Wemby, he could become the exact kind of calm closure the Spurs lacked against New York. But the history is complicated. The exit was painful. The trust would need to be real. And at this stage of his career, the Spurs would have to ask whether Kawhi's body and timeline match what Wembanyama is becoming. Then there is LeBron. The idea of LeBron joining Wemby sounds almost too dramatic to believe. The old king mentoring the next face of the league, the greatest player of his generation, helping guide the most unique prospect basketball has ever seen. As a story, it is perfect. As a roster decision, it is more complicated. LeBron would bring IQ, leadership, and late game control. But San Antonio has to decide whether it wants a short-term legend or long-term balance. That is the danger with big names. They make fans dream. But dynasties are not built on dreams alone. They are built on discipline. The 3 players San Antonio cannot touch, no matter how wild the trade market becomes, San Antonio needs one rule written in stone. Victor Wembanyama, Stephon Castle, and Dylan Harper are not available. Everything else can be discussed. Picks can be moved, veterans can be packaged. Contracts can be adjusted, role players can be included. But those 3 represent the spine of the next great Spurs era. Wembanyama is obvious. You do not trade the most unique player in basketball. You do not listen to offers. You do not create rumors. You do not let another franchise believe there is even a crack in the door. His value cannot be measured by picks, players, or salary math. He is the reason everything else mattered. Castle and Harper are where the conversation becomes more interesting because other teams will ask. They have to ask. Any serious trade partner will look at San Antonio's young talent and try to pull one of those names into the deal. That is what smart front offices do. They test your discipline. But the Spurs cannot blink. Castle gives them toughness, defense, and a competitive edge that fits playoff basketball. Harper gives them creation, upside, and long-term backcourt control. Together, they form the kind of young guard foundation that can grow beside Wembanyama instead of aging away from him. That matters more than people realize. A lot of teams build around one superstar and then scramble to find the right guards. San Antonio may already have them. That gives the Spurs flexibility other franchises would love to have. The young core also protects the future financially. While Castle and Harper are still on rookie deals, San Antonio has a rare window to add talent around them. But once those extensions come, the roster gets more expensive. That means the Spurs need to use this moment wisely without sacrificing the very players who make the moment special. This is where patience and aggression must meet. Be aggressive with picks. Be aggressive with veteran. Be aggressive with creative trade packages. But do not be reckless with the core. Because if Wemby, Castle, and Harper grow together, the Spurs are not building for one championship run. They are building for an era. Why the Spurs suddenly hold the NBA's most dangerous hand? Most teams enter the offseason searching for hope. The Spurs enter it holding leverage. That is the difference. They have the superstar, they have the young core, they have trade assets, they have financial flexibility, they have a culture players respect. And now, after reaching the finals, they have proof that this is not a theoretical project anymore. San Antonio has arrived. That changes how everyone sees them. Free agents who once viewed the Spurs as a rebuilding team now see a destination. Veterans who want a ring can look at Wembanyama and understand the opportunity. Shooters know they will get open looks. Defenders know they will play behind the best rim protector in the sport. Playmakers know the offense has a giant target who can turn average passes into easy points. That kind of gravity matters. Wembanyama does not only change games, he changes negotiations. The Spurs also have draft capital, which gives them options. They do not have to overpay out of fear. They can wait, they can pressure teams, they can choose between a major swing and smaller upgrades. They can explore the market for Markkanen, Murphy, Davis, Gafford, or another name that becomes available later. Optionality is power, and right now, San Antonio has more of it than almost anyone. But power only matters if it is used wisely. The Spurs must avoid becoming obsessed with the biggest move. Sometimes the best championship addition is not the player who dominates headlines. Sometimes it is the backup big who saves Wemby 4 minutes of energy. Sometimes it is the wing who hits 3 corner shots in a Game 6. Sometimes it is the veteran who calms the offense when a young team starts rushing. That is how titles are won, not just with stars, but with structure. The rest of the league already understands what is happening. Teams are no longer building only to beat the Nuggets, the Thunder, the Celtics, or the Knicks. They are starting to ask a new question. Can we survive Wembanyama? That is the highest compliment in basketball, and it means the Spurs are no longer chasing the league. The league is now preparing for them, the decision that will define the next Spurs dynasty. This is the moment San Antonio has been waiting for. Not the draft lottery, not the first Wembanyama highlight, not the first playoff win, not even the finals appearance. Those were milestones. This is the real test. What do you do when the future arrives early? That is the question facing the Spurs right now. They can stay patient, but they cannot stand still. They can be aggressive, but they cannot become desperate. They can chase another star, but they cannot forget that Wembanyama is already the center of the basketball universe in San Antonio. The strategy should be clear. First, protect the core. Wembanyama, Castle, and Harper should be treated as the foundation. Second, secure the shooters who already fit the system. Third, find a reliable backup big so Wemby does not have to carry every defensive possession. Fourth, search for a forward who brings spacing, length, and playoff toughness. And finally, evaluate De'Aaron Fox honestly, without emotion. That is how smart franchises operate. They do not panic after pain. They learn from it. The finals loss should not embarrass San Antonio. It should educate them. The Knicks did not destroy the Spurs. They exposed what San Antonio still needs to become. Better late-game execution, more experience, more reliable depth. Another closer, another body to absorb pressure when Wembanyama is tired. Those are fixable problems, but only if the Spurs remain honest. The human lesson here is bigger than basketball. Greatness should not be rushed, but it also should not be taken for granted. When you have a talent like Wembanyama, the goal is not to squeeze everything out of him immediately. The goal is to build an environment where he can grow, lead, fail, learn, and win without carrying the entire burden alone. That is responsible leadership. That is how you protect a young superstar. That is how you build something peaceful, stable, and lasting, instead of chasing chaos for attention. LeBron's message was not just praise. It was a reminder. The NBA is changing. A new era is forming. And if San Antonio makes the right decisions now, this may not be remembered as the year the Spurs lost the final. It may be remembered as the year before the dynasty truly began. If you believe the Spurs should build patiently around Wembanyama, comment 1. If you think they need one massive blockbuster trade right now, comment 2. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and share it with another NBA fan who needs to hear what is coming next. Because the Wembanyama era is no longer coming. It is already here.